Hi there, I'm Tony Clayton-Lea, an Irish arts writer, and I'd like to welcome Tomm Moore and Ross Stewart of Kilkenny-based Cartoon Saloon to the Capital Irish Film Festival. Tomm and Ross, you're welcome. Say hello.
Hi.
Oh yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, good. You are here to talk about the latest animated feature from Cartoon Saloon. It's called Wolfwalkers. In a nutshell, because we'll be expanding on what you're about to tell me in very, very soon. But in a nutshell, what is the storyline?
Do you want to go for it, Ross?
The elevator pitch. The daughter of a hunter becomes the very thing that he is hunting and forces him to reevaluate his life choices.
Right. Okay. I've seen the movie. It's yet another really beautiful, very thought-provoking, kind of elemental piece of work, which Cartoon Saloon I think is kind of renowned for at this stage. And visually, it's also I'm hesitant to use the cliche arresting, but it's very, very it's a real feast for the eyes. And I think one of the things that not at all. And I think one of the things that you've done here, perhaps more than your other works, is that you've distinguished brilliantly urban from rustic. Like the inhabitants and the townspeople of Kilkenny, they're kind of sharp angles, whereas the forest habitation where the wolves are, that's more fluid, wilder. The town hints at control, oppression, subjugation. The forest points to community and a sense of belonging. And I think, if you don't, I mean, I'm not telling you what the film is about, believe me.
No, you're spot on. You're spot on.
But to me, those are really important messages in the telling of the story. What do you think, Ross?
Well, yeah, as Tom said, you're spot on there. I mean, when Tom and myself were developing the story with Will Collins, the screenwriter, we were also developing a visual language for the whole film on our own at the start, but then we got some really talented artists in to help us. And exactly as you described, we had two contrasting worlds there. One of the Lord Protector's rules, which has to be a cage for Robin and has to be very oppressive and rigid, and it's reinforced by geometric patterning and a lack of perspective, and it's very much like closed in around Robin to prevent her from having any escape or any choice. And then the forest, in contrast to that, has to be wild and instinctive and free. And the whole visual language there is curves and womb-like shapes and like flowing lines and energetic mark making and impressionistic painting. And so yeah, the two worlds really contrast as much as possible. They have to inhabit the same universe, so they have to be somewhat consistent in color and like contrast in that, but really we try to push them as far apart visually as possible.
And narratively, there's a kind of one area or environment mirrors the other, in that the sense of family is crucial, I think, to both areas. Like, for instance, the young Wolfwalker Maeve, her mother is missing somewhere. For Robin, the kind of towny girl, the daughter of the English hunter, her mother is also missing, and she's also having conflict with her father. So what simple but effective messages about childhood and parenting did you want to convey here? Maybe Tom, if you wouldn't mind answering that question.
Yeah, okay. We were exploring different things and some similar things at the same time from our other projects. And I definitely think that there was a thread of two loving parents in completely different ways and how the kids react to that. So where Moll had really empowered Maeve and left her with a lot of control and a lot of freedom, Robin felt restricted because Dad was so over protective and sort of helicoptering to the point where she felt kind of hemmed in, not just by society but by his overprotectiveness, you know. So we're kind of looking a little bit about, you know, that time in your life when you want to break out and be a bit separate too, society and to your parents, and kind of establish who you are. And that could be a metaphor for all kinds of things, but people at different times in their lives, but particularly in that sort of age between like 10 and 14, which are our primary audience. You know, they're our first audience for the movie. Secondary would be the rest of the family. And that age group, I think, really responds to those transition moments. And that's when they push against their parents. And so they go from, like Robin does, I find in my experience raising my own son, they go from really wanting to be just like you as a parent, and then you as a parent come to expect that, to being literally the opposite and needing to push against you to find who they are. And oftentimes you find yourself having to learn or relearn who you are in the face of who your children are naturally and who they need to be, rather than who you expect them to be or want them to be. So there's a little bit of a dialogue about that that seems to have been running through a lot of the projects we've worked on.
It also, I would think, explores how society, especially an authoritarian society, can really test and divide a family. You know, like if Lord Protector hadn't come in with all his rules, maybe Bill and Robin would have had a much more loving, you know, like relationship and a stable home for her. And then also Moll wouldn't have been captured, and Moll and Maeve and the wolves could have gone off. So really, it's like this catalyst is testing and breaking, trying to break these families apart. And really, only the kids can try and make it be fixed and coalesce at the end.
Yeah. And then the storyline, particularly the relationship between the two girls, that's the storyline is quite feminine. Like it weighs heavily on the feminine, I think, and the friendship between the two young girls. Like Robin is quiet, but also quite rebellious, and you know, Maeve is a firebrand essentially. You know, quick to lob any insulting remark to anybody that, you know, gets in the way. And what I really liked about those two characters was that although they are familiar, they're by no means stereotypes, in my opinion. So how did you manage to outline them so familiarly, but also so distinctly?
I think
an evolution, wasn't it? So
it's like we always
the writing.
Yeah, we always kind of imagined that Robin and Maeve would be like incomplete themselves, you know, on their own, and that they might, you know, teach each other what the other needs in a kind of a throwback to maybe the old Gilgamesh story, or like the Odd Couple story. Maeve is so wild that she has no responsibility and she has no almost attention span. She can't focus on anything, and Robin doesn't have any freedom, and all she wants is agency. All she wants is, like, you know, her father to listen to her, or for herself to decide her own choices. So each character kind of has too much of one thing and not enough of the other, and only by coming together and becoming friends can they actually teach each other like what they need. Robin ultimately becomes a wolf and finds a freedom and a wildness that she's never even imagined that she would get. And then Maeve, by becoming friends with Robin, can actually learn how to focus and how to, like, you know, take a little bit of responsibility and lead the pack and learn from her mother's teachings, and finally, you know, use her skills to help her mother in the end, you know.
Right. I think one aspect of any work of animation that engages the viewer, aside from the animation, is the voices that are used. And I think the voices here are just really, really terrific. I'm not just saying that because, you know, there are Irish voices in there and they are perfect, obviously. I'm just saying, you know, even the use of the English actors, Sean Bean, the young girl who voices Robin, to what extent would you two people as co-directors, how much involved are you in syncing the characters that you've drawn with the voices that portray them?
It starts with the voices, really. The animated performance is only roughly outlined in the storyboard whenever we cast the actors, and then we spend a few weeks working with the actors, or even just a week in the case of some of the adult actors. And once we've found those actors and we've cast it correctly, and we've been lucky every time, I think then the directing is kind of, it's a two-hander, because we hear what they want to bring to it as well. So Sean Bean was someone that we really had in mind from early on, and he was maybe the first person that we locked in. And then when we were looking for the voice of Robin, we knew we needed a little English girl, because it was one of the things that was appealing to Ross and myself was this was the first of the 3 films based on Irish folklore and history that would include a kind of a culture much more definitively than we'd ever done before outside of Ireland in the actors. And so like that was an exciting idea. And so we had casting from all over England for the little girl, and Honor Nisi brought so much to the part, and then her acting in the room with Eva Whittaker, Maeve, and that friendship that was evolving that we kind of captured in real life, as well as the parts they were playing, or her relationship to Bill, or even how they reacted against Simon McBurney as the Lord Protector, or Maria Doyle Kennedy as Maeve's mom. All of that was captured in the room. So they were a mix of like incredibly experienced character actors and not very experienced at all Eva, and she held her own with them. But that mix of the young and the old all together actually in the room we recorded in Grouse Lodge, I think created a certain magic that you wouldn't get in the booth. So Ross and I as directors were able to listen to what they were bringing and hear what they were bringing, and then just guide them where we wanted them to go if they weren't quite on track. But most of the time, honestly, especially little Eva, she kind of knew the character so well, she'd tell us what Maeve would do.
Did, as a matter of interest, did Sean Bean's acting role in Game of Thrones have any influence on your choice of him?
What's that? What Game of Thrones?
Yeah, it's some small show. It might not be seen outside Kilkenny.
Sean Bean was in that, yeah. It's awful. We had to bite our cheeks, trying not to we did these awful impersonations as we were designing the character and doing the first storyboards, where we would say winter is coming and whatever we were trying to say, do it. We couldn't even do the accent, obviously, as I just demonstrated. But whenever we met him, of course, you're there like, oh no, don't do that. Like, don't be going there. And I think he really found a character for Bill that was separate, but of course we were inspired by his part in Game of Thrones, and also in Lord of the Rings, and also in Sharp, and in lots of stuff. So we were looking at videos of his performances at the same time that we were developing the character and writing the story. So we definitely knew there was a Sean Bean. It would have been hard to not have him for the dad. We would have had to reimagine the character quite a lot if it hadn't been him, because those parts were in our mind when we were designing them, for sure.
Right.
But his character though, I found it quite surprising that he's so quiet and unassuming and humble, really shy and retired in a little way. And the characters that he does play in Game of Thrones and and in Lord of the Rings are so huge and so loud and everything like that. So he's an amazing actor, because he did the same thing for Bill then when he came in and had to roar his head off and get really, really angry. It's
a very
acting is
gentle
just an
guy.
amazing thing.
Yeah, but I think they let something run through them that maybe
Mm-hmm.
is part of them, but they don't show in their everyday life. We chatted a little bit. His daughter had just gotten married, and we talked a little bit about his daughter and stuff. And I think he brought some of that to the relationship with Robin, for sure.
Okay. Another, very distinctive facet of what Cartoon Saloon does is that you have animation that is quite unlike many other animation studios. It isn't shiny, it isn't glittery. There are corners and edges to your work. And that it's to me as a kind of viewer, that's less intrusive to the way I look at things than very clean, shiny, silvery, smooth animation that I also see and also quite like. But that's always been Cartoon Saloon's signature style, really, hasn't it, Tomm?
Yeah, we were chatting a bit about that, Tony, there earlier, because I started a little creative council again with the directors and supervisors in the studio, and we were just talking about the problems of the day. But at the end, there was this question of everyone's directing different projects, and everybody has kind of got their own taste, and they're bringing something to it. But what's kind of uniting it? And you know, we keep coming back to the same thing. It's just loving the hand-drawn look and feeling that it's kind of timeless. And as they explore different softwares and all, the wariness is always, let's not do something that's going to date very quickly. Let's try and keep that traditional animation look, however we achieve it in the end. So without it being a signature style that we want to kind of constrict ourselves with, I think it's more a way of thinking about animation, that we want to build it up from drawings and traditional media as much as possible, rather than chasing the shiniest, latest thing that software can do, because it tends to be impressive for approximately, like, you know, 8 days, and then the latest thing comes out that's even shinier and more impressive. So I think if you kind of focus on the more timeless aspects of design and children's book illustration and all that stuff, I think you can create stories that are a little bit more long-lived, you know.
Right.
I think it's probably important to mention too, though, that, like, you know, Cartoon Saloon isn't the only one doing like hand-drawn animation. That there are studios all across Europe doing it, and up until recently in America as well. But you know, the bigger studios seem to have a stranglehold on the market to some extent over there. But like, there are great films that have come out this year, like Calamity, and last year with Klaus, that was hand-drawn too. So I think maybe Wolfwalkers just has a really large platform to be able to get out there and to be shown to all over the world. But if people do like hand-drawn, they can find other hand-drawn films from Europe that are equally as impressive, you know.
What I think is exciting as well is that hand-drawn's going through a bit of a renaissance. Like, that hand-drawn animation was seen as old-fashioned and kind of retro for a while because Disney stopped doing it. But now there's so many amazing directors, as Ross mentioned, you know, coming up and reinventing it and reimagining it. And you couldn't see more difference between the style of Wolfwalkers, Calamity, and Klaus, but they're all hand-drawn, and I think that's really lovely to see.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. The other thing about Cartoon Saloon is that I think is it this year you're celebrating your 21st birthday?
Yeah,
like that. So,
yeah.
Tomm, now Ross, I don't know whether you were there from the very, very beginning. I
He
think
was,
you were.
God bless him. He was there before. He was there before Cartoon Saloon. Ross and myself have been working together since we were in Young Irish Filmmakers as teenagers, you know.
Sure.
But young Cartoon Saloon started kind of as an extension of college. So Ross and myself had known each other since school, but some of the other guys, Nora and Paul and all, we met in college, and then we all came back down to Kilkenny. Yeah, the year 2000. We incorporated the company, and we were part of Young Irish Filmmakers for a while then, you know.
Well, you know, I mean, it does beg a fairly obvious question. You know, when you started back in, I don't know, 1999, the year 2000, what kind of aims did you have? I mean, obviously, the likes of, you know, Golden Globes, Oscar noms, Oscar wins, etc., etc., etc.
Oh yeah,
Maybe.
we were ready for all that. We were ready for that the first year. The only thing that frustrated us is it took so long. And now I'm only frustrated that we're not a mega corporation controlling the whole. I think Ross and myself laugh about it because I think there was a sense of like, I will do this for a bit and get real jobs or something, or we'll do this,
Yeah.
make one film and we'd be lucky, you know. And if nobody
Yeah,
sees except
the aim was to make a film, just make a film. That was it.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, call the whole thing off and just go off in separate ways and separate directions. And yeah, I don't think any of us could have foreseen that, like, if we would actually make the film and then it would be received well and then we would get an Oscar nomination and all the rest of it. That was just fairy tale stuff, you know, fantasy. So
really and truly. And it was interesting as well how it evolved, and I think it evolved very naturally, and I think I'm glad in a way that it did, because it meant that the studio wasn't what's the word, it wasn't kind of offering anything other than just a kind of a workshop environment. So the type of people that came to the studio weren't expecting it to be Disney or Pixar or anything. They were people that were into just the kind of art schooly kind of vibe that we had going on, and I'm just so happy that it's continued, because I'm like, you know, I'm into my 40s now, and there's young people coming up from college that are saying that they were inspired by Secret of KELLS to get into animation, and I'm learning from them all the time too. So I'm just happy that we've been able to keep that sort of vitality to the studio as it has grown. You know, it still does feel in a lot of ways like we're only starting, which is crazy. It's 21 years later.
Yeah, and then there is also that strong sense or sensibility of the indie aesthetic, you know, which has clearly always been there. So initially, at least, did you have any concerns whatsoever partnering with Apple Plus
Yeah, no, I mean, that was a relationship that had evolved. Like, we'd known Tara, because like there's other aspects to the studio. Like, we don't, like, the feature films are kind of our flagship, but they don't pay the bills all the time, you know? So we do other work. So we were doing a TV series for Tara when she was an executive in Amazon. So we kind of knew that she was the right kind of head, the kind of person that was into the kind of things we were doing. And we had Wolfwalkers already financed with our usual co-producers in France and Luxembourg. And we had a partner in China as well who'd been involved in Song of the Sea. So we were kind of making the movie anyway, and Tara wanted Apple to come in for the rest of the world. So it was a different offer than Apple coming to us and saying, make us a movie for Apple. It was Apple saying, we would like to have the worldwide rights to a movie that you're making anyway. And because it was number 3 in a kind of loose trilogy or triptych, everybody involved in Apple knew the kind of movie we were making. It wasn't like it was, you know, that we're going to get lots of notes, but there was a bit of nervousness. I remember Ross and myself kind of going, I wonder how much influence they're going to want, you know, because you can go into a relationship with whatever corporation, and when they're that big, you're kind of, you know, you never know how it's going to go. So, I mean, we've been really lucky. I don't know what you'd say, Ross, but I've been feeling fairly like they've only added to the publicity.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they gave minor little notes, and it really only, you know, like, it was really only concerns about the ratings that the film would get in the end, because they wanted to appeal to a family audience. So, like, we were kind of going, well, if that's all the notes that they're going to give them, that's absolutely great, you know. We because
there was feck as well. We weren't allowed to say feck as well. That was the other thing we had to call it feck. So.
That was one of the things we had to suck up.
But we were getting cheeky with that anyway, because I think there was like 1 or 2 fecks in Song of the Sea that we got away with, and then we kind of went to town on it in Wolfwalkers, so we had to kind of pull back a bit. But other than that, they were fairly laid back. Right. And I think the publicity side of it has been great, because as you say, hand-drawn films haven't really been that big in the States, and to have a hand-drawn film with like billboards in New York and LA and all the trailers and everything, and on such a major platform, it is really nice for the art form. It's nice for us who've been indies for so long to be part of the conversation. I mean, it's still like an nth of the budget of your average Disney movie, which would be like hundreds of millions, and we were in around 10 million. So, you know, it's kind of cool to be kind of punch above your weight when you have the marketing power of someone like Apple behind you, you know?
Yeah, and were they, as a matter of interest, were they fine with the focus on the Irish folklore?
Oh yeah, no, as I say, that's what they were kind of getting into, because Wolfwalkers was fairly fully formed, and Tara, and then Matt Dentler as well, but I was originally Tara was the connection. She kind of knew, like, she'd worked with us on TV shows, so she knew what Cartoon Saloon were about, and so that's why I thought it was really perfect. She really wanted to get us on board, and she sort of felt, I remember going to the big open day they had for all the different creators, and there was people like Steven Spielberg and stuff there, but also there was guys like Oliver Jeffers, and you know, I could tell she, and the guys from the Sesame Workshop, they were doing stuff with, I could tell Tara had that sort of old school commissioning editor kind of thinking what would be good content for kids, not just commercial content. And I felt like we were kind of hanging out with the people that were doing kids stuff for Apple, and I felt like everyone else had the same sort of agenda that we would have. We were not pure like selling breakfast cereal and toys kind of content, but people who would have maybe a bit more of an arty idea of what animation could be. So I felt like we were part of it, you know, a very curated offering. I know she'd Snoopy and loads of really interesting, but felt like we were part of a pretty elite team to be asked to be part of Apple TV Plus's launch, as opposed to just like another project on Netflix where there's so many different things, you know.
Yeah. And the other thing about making a film for the age demographic that you say, but as you say, it's about between 10 to 14, is that I think, you know, there's a large responsibility for making movies for that age group, because it behoves you as responsible people to make something that they really need to know about. Instead of just distracting them with, you know, kind of slightly rude jokes and wisecracking characters that generally are always either on your arm or on your shoulder. So I get a sense that you take that responsibility very, very seriously.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think Tomm himself wouldn't want to devote like 7 years of our life into something that didn't have a good message that we also believed in, you know, like you really have to have to stay like motivated and stay immersed in it and stay like, you know, full of energy for the project over that amount of time. So if you were just selling toys or whatever, personally, I couldn't do it, and I reckon Tomm couldn't do it either. Like,
No.
you know, and I think as an artist too, you want to have a message that comes from yourself as well, that you believe in, that you would agree with. So, you know, whether you're like a painter or a poet or you know, a script writer or anything, you want to impart some bit of knowledge that you think the world should learn about.
I did feel like we were with people who had common cause. Like I mentioned, the Sesame Workshop people, for example. Like when we were kids, we loved things like Dark Crystal and Labyrinth and those kind of movies that were for kids, but that could be returned to again and again. And my little granddaughter is 3, and she sat and watched Wolfwalkers there yesterday. I know, like, she chuckled at the funny bits and ran around howling at the exciting bits and stuff and hid behind Mammy for the scary bits. But I know she'll be able to come back to it again at 6 and then again at 10. You know, and maybe even as an adult. And I feel like there'll be another layer to it for each age group. So that's satisfying as for us as artists to make something that we feel is. I always talk about E.T. Like I remember showing E.T. to my son, and I loved it as a kid. But when I watched it when he was a kid, I was like, oh, this is a movie about like divorce and like a absentee dad and a lonely kid who can't get along with his brother. And I was like, wow, this movie's about a lot more family stuff than I as a little kid realized it was about, you know. So.
One of the things that happened when we were developing Wolfwalkers too is, like, you know, we had like themes in there that we were passionate about, like, you know, polarization of society and all kinds of things, but like the autocratic leader who demands, like, you know, people follow orders and uses fear to like control that. Well, like during production, we thought that maybe some of those things would be a bit redundant by the end, but then as the film was being developed, like, you know, we had like Bolsonaro in South America and Trump in America, and like lots of leaders who were you know, very much like emulating Lord Protector's style of rule. And then, you know, the forests were on fire at the same time as we were drawing the forest on fire in Wolfwalkers. So we were like, Jesus, there are really like strong messages that are just as relevant, if not more relevant now, that kids should be learning about. So
yeah. I hate to bring up the Oscar word, but this is the 4th film, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the 4th film that has a lot of Oscar buzz about it. Does that
This would be the fourth feature. If we got
feature.
nominated, this would be the 4th feature and the 5th if we got nominated. So we don't want to break the streak, Tony. It'd be bad news if we broke the streak. So we're trying not to jinx it too much.
Okay.
I like the people are talking about it positively, and that we're seen as a real contender, not a complete dark horse like we were back with Secret of KELLS. But I definitely don't like counting me chickens, so we'll just see.
No, as I say, it's just Oscar buzz. But as a kind of tangential question, I mean, you've been to the ceremony and all of that kind of razzmatazz. How much of it is? How much of it is, sorry, Tomm. How much of it is good fun, and how much of it is somewhat of a kind of necessary? I'm not going to use the word necessary evil, but I mean it's necessary to be there. Is it part great fun and part, you know, you're looking at your watch and thinking, when am I going to get back to the hotel?
I wouldn't say there's much looking at the watch. There is a sense that, especially in the previous productions, when we were a lot more broke and we were like going, I hope this all works out as being worthwhile, because you're like, you know, there's no check with an Oscar nomination. It costs money for everyone to be out in LA and meeting and greeting and stuff, but I think it's always an investment because your profile is raised for those few weeks. I was just joking there, poor old Ross hasn't been to the Oscar ceremony yet, and if we do get nominated this time, I doubt he's going to
go either. I've worked on 3 Oscar nominated movies so far, and I've never been to them. So
on the other hand,
I'm just destined to not go.
On the other hand, you could say it's your first feature as a director, and you got nominated for a Golden Globe, so that's pretty good. I've never been nominated before, so you could look at it that way too.
Yeah,
positive.
I know.
It is,
I've
Tony.
Definitely thankful for everything. Yeah.
I will say, Tony, that a lot of good came out of the nomination. Secret of KELLS getting nominated was just so many things came out of it, not directly, but over time, that made it possible for us to continue as a studio when things were tough. And so once we started, and once Secret of KELLS had done, not being nominated, had done so much for us as a studio, we never sort of were too churlish about having to go and sort of, you know, shake hands and kiss babies and stuff like that, because it's meant so much to us each time. And even when we had Song of the Sea was nominated, and Nora started working on Breadwinner with people like Angelina Jolie and stuff as a producer, each time, you know, there's been something positive that's come out of it. So I was complaining unbelievably churlishly in January 2020 about the upcoming travel that was ahead of me, and oh God, here we go again kind of thing. And now I'm only kicking myself that I was moaning, because I only wish I could do it now, you know.
Yeah. No. Well, finally, Tom and Ross, what, in essence, what do you want people to get from Wolfwalkers when, you know, when the kind of credits start rolling? The very, very long credits start rolling, because so many people work on it. What are you going to want them to look at each other and say?
There's a few different things that you'd hope they come away with. I think there's just a sense of empathy at heart, basic level, isn't that it? Right?
Yeah, I mean, speciesism was one thing that we were quite passionate about when we were coming up with the story. You know, how like the wolves are now extinct in Ireland, as every Irish person will know, and that came from viewing them as like a creature that had no right to exist, you know, and like the Lord Oliver Cromwell came over with this sole intention to make them extinct. And with the wolves being gone from Irish society, we haven't just lost one of our major, like, you know, fauna. We've lost all of Irish culture that relates to wolves. Like when Tom and myself were researching the folktales and like a lot of the social history that went along with wolves, that's completely lost to us now, because it doesn't have any relevance anymore. You know, like how people interact with wolves is just completely foreign to the average Irish person now. But 300 years ago, it was there, and it was relevant, and it was rich. And so we're not just losing like a species when something like the wolves go extinct, we're losing a part of ourselves as well.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a very important lesson, I think, for everybody who watches the movie to kind of to get, you know, that history and folklore and that kind of mix of the two are slowly, if not very swiftly, disappearing.
Yeah, we need to hold on to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like we're going through one of the major extinctions of not just fauna but flora and cultures and languages and everything right now, and these things are worth keeping because they do teach us.
It's not about preservation and conservation, it's about regeneration. It's like stories in particular are valuable if they're regenerated and become relevant again. They're not like in a dusty book and okay, we preserved it, but it's keeping things alive and reimagining and rewilding the imagination all the time. So it kind of runs through everything that we're doing. But I mean, just seeing my little granddaughter running around on all fours howling, that was enough for me. I like that was good too.
Yeah, and if everyone can like, you know, just go out to their garden and just keep a little corner to just let go wild, that would be really good for wildlife as well. It's important to bring a little bit of wildness back into our lives.
Sure. I think I'll do this after the interview. Tom Moore and Ross Stewart, Cartoon Saloon, thank you very much. Continued success. And not that I want to jinx it, but best of luck for us.
Thank you.
Okay. Fingers crossed.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much,
Tony.
Tony. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.